Martin Scorsese's 1976 film Taxi Driver, written by Paul Schrader and starring Robert De Niro, is a complex character study about a taxi driver losing his mind through isolation and sorrow. Noboru Iguchi's 2009 film Robo Geisha, starring Ai Kaguchi, is about a robotic geisha who for the most part spends her time assassinating people. On the surface level, despite having adopted the same naming conventions, these films couldn't seem any further apart. From their titles alone, the uninformed could successfully deduce that one is probably more character-driven, while the other leans more heavily on plot. This doesn't mean that these two films can't have striking similarities that outweigh their differences. One might even go so far as to suggest that Robo Geisha is actually a modern version of Taxi Driver. Although this claim might not appear credible, it's not entirely without merit. There are indeed remarkable similarities between these two films, currently awaiting analysis. But first, a brief summary of the content is in order. Taxi Driver chronicles the life of Travis Bickle, a 26-year-old Vietnam War veteran who becomes a cab driver in New York City during the mid-70s. His justification when applying for the job is that he can't sleep. Along with his insomnia, he's a lonely individual struggling for a sense of meaning in his life. An unsuccessful attempt to court a woman by taking her to a porn theater leads to a severe deterioration of his mental stability. Seemingly giving up on the idea of being accepted by society, he takes more extreme and violent measures to fulfill a meaningful purpose in his life. Robo Geisha follows the life of Yoshi Kasuga, the younger, badly treated sister to a successful geisha. One day, she accompanies her sister to see a client, but they are unexpectedly recruited into an army of geisha assassins by a powerful steel corporation. The sisters' toxic relationship morphs into a sibling rivalry as to who can become the more powerful assassin. When Yoshi is ordered to assassinate a group of seemingly benign elders, she refuses to comply, and upon learning the true goals of the corporation, she eventually turns against the forces that recruited her while trying to rescue her sister from the clutches of the organization. Before we visit the crux of how these two films are so similar, some clarification is required in regards to the standards being used to objectively compare these two pieces of art. Every work of art has a message or statement to be conveyed, otherwise known as the substance. How the message is conveyed pertains to style. Judging simply by briefly contrasting the trailers, style is obviously not the common denominator between these two films.
Just get me out of here, all right?
Now, Robert De Niro creates a terrifying portrait of life on the edge of madness.
Tabby, just forget about this. It's nothing.
Taxi Driver, a film by Martin Scorsese.
Geisha's voodoo. Geisha is wife. Geisha is what?
地獄へおいでやす
One of these films is nuanced, candid and realistic. The other is crude, hyperbolic and irrational. To contrast Taxi Driver's nuance with Robo Geisha's crudeness, dialogue is also a good indicator. Take the scene in Taxi Driver, when Travis tries reaching out to his colleague Wiz for life advice.
It's just that I gotta...
Things got you down?
Yeah.
Happens to the best of.
Yeah, it got me real down, real... I really wanna... I got some bad ideas in my head,
Travis is barely able to get a few words out, but the subtext conveys Travis's hidden pain, his inability to express himself, and his confusion all at the same time. Contrast that with some scenes from Robo Geisha. These characters are literally just saying what's happening, or providing the most obvious commentary regarding the states. One could argue that the complete lack of subtext introduces a new meta-subtext. Here's Taxi Driver's candidness juxtaposed with Robogeisha's hyperbole.
Let's not have any trouble,
What are
okay?
you talking about? Why won't you talk to me? Why won't you talk to me? Why don't you answer my calls when I call? You think I don't know you're here?
Let's not have any
you think
trouble.
I don't know? You think I don't know?
Would you please leave?
Get your hands off.
Okay, then leave.
あんたよりにもよって影野の坊ちゃんの前で恥かかせよってそんなに私が尺に触るの
姉さんすいません
ほら芸者だ蹴るんだキックするんだ
だってなんか
黙らしゃ大根私の心も痛いんだよ止めんなこら
And finally, we need to pit Taxi Driver's realism against Robogeisha's irrationality. Although the qualifiers have been attributing to Robogeisha may generally have negative connotations, I'm not casting aspersions on it, and Noguchi successfully applies these qualifiers consistently. So although the movie demonstrates irrationality, it's an irrationality that conforms to the laws governing the movie's internal logic. There is, however, one stylistic choice that unifies both films. The stories are mainly told from the perspectives of the main characters. We get a direct line of communication with Travis's thoughts as he reads out his diary entries throughout Taxi Driver.
May 10th. Thank God for the rain, which has helped wash away the garbage and the trash off the sidewalks.
And Yoshi's story in Robogeisha is framed as a personal recount of her life.
ロボットか芸者かそれは私自身わからない今も昔も一つだけ言えること数ヶ月前まで私は何者でもなかった
On a final note regarding style, along with it ultimately serving the substance of a film, it can also have a bearing on the interpretation of the substance. Particularly in the case of these two films, their disparate stylistic choices are concealing an important truth. If you peer through the stylistic differences, you'll see that the inherent structure of these two movies are practically identical, and they are more or less conveying the same message, or substance. So let's begin with the central arguments as to how Robogeisha is more or less just Taxi Driver for a modern audience. To do this, we're going to analyze the similarities between each movie's character development and plot. Both of these characters have suffered through trauma. Although we don't get many specific details of Travis's past, it's indicative that he probably has PTSD.
Military record. Honorable discharge, May 1973.
Oh, in the army?
Marines.
Similarly, Yoshi's parents died when she was young, and she's continually abused by her older sister.
よしえ何サボってんのよさっさと私の着物用意してよ
姉さんごめんなさい
何その言い方っていうかその卑屈な目つきも嫌なのよお母さんよしえたら私のことじーっと睨んで気色悪いったらありゃしない
華やかで人の
She suffers from self-esteem issues and never thinks she'll amount to anything or be accepted by society.
部分だけで作られた
These problems result in a feeling of inadequacy for the characters and a sense of ostracization from society, so they have difficulty finding any societally appropriate purpose or meaning in their lives. These issues provide the underpinning conflicts throughout both films, self versus self and self versus society. These conflicts first manifest themselves through the characters' difficulty forming or maintaining healthy relationships. Yoshi's only meaningful relationship is with her sister, but it's fraught with viciousness and hatred.
どうせ妹ができるならもっと別の子が良かったわよ一番最悪のタイプ
Travis makes various attempts to talk to women and form a bond, but he seems to always unknowingly go about it in the wrong way and always experiences rejection.
Can I help you?
Yeah, what's your name? My name is Travis.
Troy!
All right, okay, I'm just...
Loneliness has followed me my whole life. Everywhere. Bars and cars. Sidewalks, stores, everywhere. There's no escape. I'm God's lonely man.
姉さん、舞妓の世界は暴力とは無縁どすえ。物騒なことはやめなはれ。死にだ。
Both of these characters experience ignition points where their conflicts begin intensifying. The moment for Travis is when he is rejected by Betsy after trying to take her to a porn theater.
What?
This is a dirty movie.
Öppna ett tempel och du ska känna dig som hemma.
You know, I didn't know that you'd feel that way about this movie. I don't know much about movies, but if I had known...
What kind of movie you should go to?
Come on! I'm gonna tell you, you're in a
come on!
His subsequent efforts to apologize and rekindle a bond are rebuffed, which leads to his aforementioned chat with his fellow colleague Wizard for advice. Wizard frankly has no idea on how to help Travis, so he's left to his own devices, and his destructive thoughts bottle up and manifest in increasingly erratic behavior and thinking.
Hey, Travis, this here's Easy Andy. He's a traveling salesman.
How you doing, Travis?
How much for everything?
All together.
It becomes apparent that, perhaps not unrelated to being a Vietnam vet, the only way Travis knows how to deal with the situation is through violence. Having given up on trying to be accepted by society, he spends his days training for an inevitable violent confrontation with society. Yoshi's ignition point is being recruited by the Kageno Steel Corporation as a geisha assassin. She discovers that she has a capacity for violence and embraces it. Just like Travis, she also decides to spend her days preparing for a violent confrontation with society. On the bright side for Yoshi, she has garnered a new place in her organization. However, it's probably not unlike Travis's experiences in the military, for its sole purpose is to develop her into a killer. Therefore, just like Travis, the girls are inculcated into believing that the best way to solve problems is through violence. Violence is what gives these characters a sense of purpose, so they all spend their days training to kill. In both films, the intensification of the characters' conflicts is represented through literal physical transformations. In Taxi Driver, Travis arms himself with weapons and builds body-mounted contraptions that allow him to be a more effective killer.
Faster than you.
Into unemployment.
His transformation is complete when he dons a mohawk, a hairstyle adopted by certain soldiers, reportedly as an intimidation tactic that originated in World War II. He then goes to carry out his mission, the primary goal of which is to inflict violence. Similarly, the sisters in Robo Geisha, as the name of the film might suggest, begin their transformations into killer robots. Transformations start off relatively minor, in the form of weapons built into their bodies. There are even side characters that undergo transformations. Not unlike Travis's reference to War haircut, the peak of Yoshi's transformation is literally becoming a tank.
すごい。私が戦車になるなんて。
Although there are stylistic differences in the execution, the symbolism is the same.
All my life needed was a sense of some place to go. Here is...
I've stated that both of these characters turn to violence as a means of justifying their existence, but specifically, both of these characters become assassins with identical arcs. Let's begin with Travis. His first kill is a robber.
Get him? Yeah, I got him.
It's satisfying, but it's not enough to fill his void. He needs to leave a lasting impression on society and demonstrate that he has power. So, he decides to assassinate a senator at a presidential rally.
Now I see it clearly. My whole life is pointed in one direction. I see that now. There never has been any choice for me.
Part of his motivation for this is to get revenge on how he was treated by Betsy and her particular clique of society who were working in the senator's election campaign. But at the rally, a security guard notices him and his plan is thwarted. Yoshi also comes to the realization that she can achieve purpose through killing.
他の女たちもそうだったに違いない。みんな現実に挫折し、すがるように革命を信じた。しかし
Yoshi and her sister carry out their first successful assassination mission for the Kijeno Steel Corporation.
苦しいのか？苦痛か？
いえ、お腹よりも目がうずきます。
Afterwards, Yoshi busies herself carrying out a plethora of assassinations. Like Travis, she doesn't particularly question the morality of any of her actions. She just likes to fulfill her purpose as a killer and appreciates the recognition for it.
出てくるのさ。
It's not until Yoshi's asked to assassinate a bunch of elderly people that she even questions her orders.
今回の標的の所在地はここから近い。しかも
こんな老人たち、どうして抹殺するんですか。どう見ても権力者じゃないでしょう。
おめえは標的の素性に興味持たなくてもいいんだよ。
Just like Travis, she's not interested in whether it's morally justifiable. Even upon spending time with her targets and understanding their innocent plight, she only barely decides to spare them.
影の製鉄という悪魔の巣窟だ。あの T シャツは決しておしゃれで着てるわけではない。あの顔写真は誘拐された家族のものだ。
She would never have hesitated firing if they weren't senior citizens whose only means of protest was literally singing. This is a trait shared by Travis in that he also has a protective nature that could be interpreted as having strong moral principles. He first demonstrates this with Betsy during their initial meeting.
And then when I came inside and I met you, I saw in your eyes and I saw the way you carried yourself that you're not a happy person. And I think you need something. And if you want to call it a friend, you can call it a friend.
You're gonna be my friend?
He then shows us this side upon meeting the young 12-year-old prostitute Iris. before implementing a half measure to set her free from her pimp as a sort of side project to his assassination attempt of the senator.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't you remember me? Don't start no trouble. Tabby, just forget about this. It's nothing. You don't remember any of that?
No.
Well, that's all right. I'm gonna get you out of here.
So we better make it or Sport will get mad.
The parallels between Travis and Yoshi in these situations couldn't be more clear. Travis gets his chance to become a hero when confronted with the vulnerability of the young.
Suck on this.
Whereas Yoshi only demonstrates her moral high ground when confronted with the vulnerable elderly.
一緒にここから出よう。私負けない。みんなを守ります。
So Travis's savior complex is stimulated and Yoshi is swayed by pity. These circumstances of being put in a position of having to defend the vulnerable end up being extremely important for both of these characters' overall character arcs. The main difference in the situations between the characters at this point is in Yoshi's conflict of interest. Unlike Travis, she has something akin to a family within the Assassin's organization, and refuses to admit that they could be at fault for having her target innocent people.
ヨシエ君、この兄弟は凶悪なテロリストだ。早急に片をつけてくれ。
Even after she's punished by her handlers for disobeying orders, she continues to serve them and dismisses accusations against the corporation from her targets.
だったらなんだい。
俺たちはお前らの会社を破壊するつもりだった。極秘開発をしている特殊兵器が完成する前にな。
関係ないね。
あいつら殺人兵器を使って日本を全滅させる気なんだぞ。
嘘。兵器は脅かしの道具だけのはずよ。
もうダメなさめねえのか。
申し訳ありませんでした。
Even though she spared the senior citizens from her wrath, the organization's leaders instead just took matters into their own hands. So Yoshi's inaction only delayed their suffering. Travis does share a similar form of mental pathology in Taxi Driver, where he maintains a distant relationship with his parents by lying about his circumstances in life.
Dear father and mother, I'm sorry again I cannot send you my address like I promised to last year, but the sensitive nature of my work for the government demands utmost secrecy.
Hey, Gabby, you can't park here.
It's interesting to point out that Yoshi lies to herself in order to stay close to her adopted family, whereas Travis lies to his family in order to keep them away.
I don't believe that one should devote his life to morbid self-attention. I believe that someone should become a person like other people.
He also contradicts himself by making severe judgments against what he calls the scum of the city, while he himself frequents porn theaters, pops pills and pours schnapps into his cereal.
All the animals come out at night. Whores, skunk pussies, buggers, queens, fairies, dopers, junkies. Sick, venal.
Well, I'm gonna go do my dirt. Travis.
Eventually, Yoshi does turn against her recruiters and a conflict between her and the corporation and its president ensues. But this didn't transpire because it was the result of a moral judgment call by Yoshi. Instead, It was an act of revenge because they blew her up with the bomb.
なんでそんな声を上げるんだい
Okay, then leave.
I just want you to know that
This
I know
parallels
I'm trying to
Travis's circumstances in that his primary motivation for assassinating the senator was, as mentioned earlier, revenge for how Betsy and her clique of society had demeaned him.
Come on! You're in a hell, and you're gonna die in a hell like the rest of you.
I realize now how much she is just like the others, cold and distant. And many people are like that. Women for sure. They're like a union.
I'm hip. But you don't look hip.
It's also feasible that his heroic act at the end is simply revenge against the pimp.
Go ahead, have yourself a good time. Go ahead, man.
Even the senior citizens in Robogeisha somehow end up enacting revenge onto their lost family members instead of rescuing them.
今の妹じゃないかなそんなの関係ねえやったんだ
悪い人だから死になさい。
Yoshi's conflicts are resolved in the only way possible, with her destroying her organization and its president, to whom she used to serve. She just happens to conveniently save the country from disaster at the same time, which makes her a hero. We don't actually see Yoshi receive recognition for her heroic takedown of Kageno Steel, but more importantly, she finally achieves peace and stability with her sister, and that represents Yoshi's long sought after inclusion into society. Remember, at the start of the film she was constantly belittled and derided by everyone in her life, and although she garnered acceptance and recognition into an evil organization, it was an unsustainable position. It exacerbated her problematic relationship with her sister, and they were forced to deal with incalculably difficult situations. So, the only way for her to overcome it was through destruction.
姉さん、やっと一つになれたんだよね。見て、私たちがあげた花火が夕空を、未来を彩ってるよ。
Similarly, after Travis's plan to kill the senator is thwarted, he instead, seemingly on a whim, goes to kill Iris's pimp and some other unsavory individuals. Because if not the senator, someone had to die tonight. The added bonus of this endeavor is that it rescued the young prostitute Iris. This in turn makes him out to be a hero in the film's final scene. Unlike Yoshi, we do get to see the newspaper clippings that celebrate him as a hero. But most importantly, like Yoshi achieving peace with his sister, Travis gets to resolve the conflict with his love interest Betsy.
Hello, Travis.
Hello.
I read about you in the papers. How are you?
Just a little stiffness. That's all.
This gives Travis a final feeling of acceptance into society, which ironically Had Travis been able to execute his initial plan, it would have had the complete opposite effect, and he would have likely been killed or sent to prison. Both of these films are about traumatized individuals trying to fit in with society. Failing to adapt, they find ways to redistribute their trauma into society through violence, but chance encounters with the vulnerable and innocent allow the characters to impart violence in a manner that garners acceptance into society. Both characters were inevitably going to cause pain and destruction. The trick was to find the right target.
You talking to me? You talking to me?
So what is the unifying insight to take from these two films? Both of these characters were on seemingly unavoidable paths of destruction with society, but ironically they became saviors of society. The unexpectedly gleeful outcome is a warning that most people under similar circumstances are probably more likely to continue their descent into the abyss. Perhaps trauma is a zero-sum game, and in the absence of having an appropriate outlet, social exclusion and destruction may be unavoidable. Both of these characters were fortunate enough to find targets in which society rewarded them for inflicting violence against them. Most people requiring an outlet for their grief wouldn't have the luck or the wherewithal to be able to accomplish such deeds. When drugs and artistic sublimation fall short, senseless violence may be inevitable.